have to be honest, I miss her terribly every day, is something that I have heard from those sharing about the loss of a spouse. Sometimes the person is then keen to quickly even it out by talking about how they know how lucky they are in so many ways. I have to be honest, I can feel very lonely, is something I have heard when speaking to people over the last few months. Although quickly, to even it out, they might add, I shouldn't really complain though. Each of us should have to be honest. What posture should we bring to this world? And how can our Jewish practice uphold this posture? There is a posture that we see from Pinchas, the eponymous, shall we say, hero of our Torah portion, that our rabbis actually associate with our act of praying the Amidah, our central standing spiritual act in our services. In the Talmud, in Tractate Brachot, our rabbis ask, where does our practice of doing the Amidah come from? Traditionally 3 times a day and 4 on Shabbat. It's a mark of the creative genius of those rabbis that have gone before us, that this question, where does the Amidah come from, is not easy to answer, and yet is on this page of Talmud brilliantly addressed. If you search for a clear commandment to pray in the Torah, you may be searching for a long time. Instances of our biblical forebearers, at least in the 5 books, doing anything that we would immediately describe as prayer, are again rare and arguably absent. Having established the core enduring practice of the Amidah, our rabbis ask, where did it come from? And 2 potential origins are suggested. One is that the Amidah and its daily times were fixed in relation to the specific daily sacrifices when the temple stood. This explanation may carry some historical truth. The other explanation conveys suggestive possibilities for what we are actually doing when we do the Amidah. This other explanation is contrary to what I have said, that our biblical fathers established each Amidah and its timing. And we may see in the biblical moments that are then brought as the instigations of the Amidah, a sense of what prayer's purpose might be and what posture towards our world it might cultivate. We are told on that page of Talmud, Abraham fixed the morning Amidah. As it says in the Torah in Genesis 19, Abraham rose in the morning to the place in which he had stood. And the Talmud continues, and there is no Amidah, there is no standing other than prayer. As it is said, Pinchas stood and prayed, and the plague stopped. So what do these 2 biblical moments, Pinchas and Abraham, say about the posture that the Amidah encourages? Pinchas stood and prayed is in fact a quote not from our Torah portion, but from Psalm 106, which retells our story in just a few verses or even a few words. Ya'amod Pinchas vayifalel. Pinchas stood and yifalel. We translated this word as prayed, and it is etymologically related to the word tefillah, the Hebrew word for prayer. However, primarily at a biblical level, it suggests that Pinchas stood and judged, or stood and intervened. So here we have a suggestion that when we stand in the Amidah, we are inculcating the capacity to act, in fact, to act like Pinchas, decisively, effectively, courageously, and scarily too. For Pinchas's act of standing up for others, of standing into the breach, is an act of zealotry, of violence, of single-minded rapidity. Yet we may still try to find the healthy invitation in our Amidah to pay attention to the qualities of those leaders, those frontline workers who have acted decisively, effectively, courageously, and to ask, how can I be decisive and effective? What is so important in my life and in this world that it requires action? Pinchas's act of standing is, however, the secondary source in that Talmudic text for our morning Amidah. As we heard, Abraham fixed the morning Amidah. As it says in the Torah in Genesis 19, Abraham rose in the morning to the place in which he had stood. And the text continues, there is no standing other than prayer. As it says, Pinchas stood and prayed, and the plague stopped. So what was Abraham doing in that act of standing? And what can we learn from him about the posture we are to cultivate every day from early in the morning onwards? He rose in the morning to the place in which he had stood. He had stood there a chapter and a day earlier, in chapter 18 of Genesis, when he had heard that the cities of Sodom and Amorah may be destroyed. And then he stood up to the divine, if one can say such a thing, demanding, should the judge of all the earth not do justice? Will you sweep away the innocent along with the guilty? And then with the most polite chutzpah, he negotiates God down to agree that if there are 10 innocent people in them, the cities will not be destroyed. So we may bring this act of standing to our lives and to our spiritual practice, to stand up for justice, to stand up for others, to both relate to and speak truth to power, even to ultimate power. This is the moment that Abraham had stood exactly here previously. But in the actual moment that we are suggestively told that Abraham fixed the Amidah in Genesis 19, this is what he is standing for. Abraham rose in the morning to the place that he had stood, when he had faced up to the Eternal. Now he looked down to face the cities of Sodom and Amorah. And behold, smoke rose from the earth like the smoke of an oven. And so the cities of the plain were destroyed. So that posture every day early in the morning that we're told to step into is one of honestly looking out at the very face of the earth. It's one of looking at loss, of looking at the loss of that which you had passionately stood up for the day earlier, and you still have the courage and resilience to stand there again, firmly and open-eyed. It's a posture of looking at pain and destruction. It's one of asking where to stand in the world, and to ask, what have I lost? Do I feel that sense of loss? Do you feel a sense of loss? What have others lost? We ask, like Abraham, to stand up and look at that loss and sympathetically hear it, and still affirm our presence in the world in the face of it. There has been much loss recently. When I last checked, and I had previously avoided checking for a long time, more than 557,965 lives had been taken by this pandemic. When we come to Yom Kippur, we will perhaps feel these words especially keenly. People of faith have passed away who were strong in good works. Valiant, they stood in the breach, turning away calamity. We may look at our own sense of loss too, the things we miss, the things we want. For some of us, a loss of confidence, in ourselves, or perhaps in authority, in some of the things we took for granted. Our loss of physical gathering together in our beautiful shul for now. The loss of any immediate return to exact normalcy as we continue to manage these losses together. We need to look at the loss that we feel and that others feel. Otherwise, we bury our heads in the sand, and there's no Jewish spiritual practice that encourages us to cultivate this. Otherwise, we just breed our fear and our anxiety. We can look out honestly at this earth and pay attention to pain and destruction, for it's only with this act that we can also find that other posture of decisive, effective action. We need to see the world as it is, so we can make it how it should be. Kol hakavod, all the respect to those in this community who over the last few weeks have formed a team to look out clearly within and beyond our walls, to look out at the world and at ourselves honestly, and to address issues of justice, to address what's important. Over the years, I know we will find in our community the support to look honestly and the spirit in our practice to do this persistently. We're aware of loss, of pain. And look, I'm not even sorry for complaining. Yes, I'm blessed, and we may be blessed in so many ways. And yes, Shabbat, this little taste of Eden, is also a chance to see those blessings before we again find ourselves looking out east of Eden. I have to be honest. We have to be honest. It's the very basis of our daily lived Judaism, to have 2 feet planted and to be open-eyed. Shabbat Shalom.